Let's give it about a minute and then we'll get started.
Yeah, and to those of you who can jump off video, that would be awesome. We love speaking to not the void, so it's also nice to put faces to names at later points as well.
Okay, awesome. Let's get started. Welcome to How to Get Into a Top MBA Program. So excited for this evening. We've got an excellent panel lined up for you. Once again, make sure you've signed up for Leland if you want access to that recording, as well as a ton of other resources after. Quick logistics, if this is your first Leland event, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Be respectful and supportive to other applicants. We're all trying to get through the same process here. And then once again, make sure to sign up if you want the recording. We always get questions about the recording. Sign up to get the recording. Awesome. Quick agenda for this evening. We'll tell you a little bit about who we are and go over the application briefly. Then we'll dive into the meat of the panel, which will be asking questions to our awesome coaches, and then we will wrap up. Quick welcome, so you know who we are. My name is Amelia. I run all content here. My job is to help you get access to the best MBA resources to help you guide and get through that process well. You will also see Amanda and Erica in the chat. Huge shout out to them. We could not do these events without them. They put a ton of work into this. So thank you, Amanda and Erica. More importantly, though, let's turn it over to the real stars of tonight, our coach panelists. I will have you guys all introduce yourselves. Let's go in order. Ben, you want to kick us off?
Yes, can everybody hear me okay? All right, sweet. Nice to meet everybody. Glad to have you joining us. I'm a coach here on Leland. I grew up in Queens, so anyone from the area, drop it in the chat. But went to WashU for undergrad, did philosophy, neuroscience, econ, smattering of different stuff, and then went on to McKinsey after undergrad, and then the Chicago Mayor's Office doing policy and economic development work. And then did the old MBA at GSB. So I'm very lucky and more than happy to, pay for whatever knowledge is, I can derive from that. But I've also been just like a coach with Leland part-time for the past couple of years and just can't speak highly enough to the resources that they can offer and just like the caliber of coaching that when I was applying, at least, I could not have even imagined existed. So it's awesome to also take part in that and love working with a ton of different folks.
All right, I will go next. Faisal Khan. I went to Booth myself, helped with the admissions office there. I've been doing MBA coaching for about 15 years. I have management consulting in my background, was an engineer by training. So I've been on the Leland platform more relatively recently. But as Ben mentioned, I've been really impressed with the resources that this platform provides for all of you on the call right now, and just the amount of information that's at your fingertips. So definitely take advantage of everything that the platform has to offer. Super excited to be here. I try to stay in touch and connected to all the business schools, and I'm excited to share whatever little information I can to help you on your journey.
Awesome. I'll round out. My name is Regan. I'm based in Dallas, but from Houston, lived in Austin, so I got all of Texas covered. Went to Vanderbilt for undergrad, majored in engineering and Spanish. Went to Harvard for my MBA, and now work at Google. Or I worked at Google, and now I work at Verily, which is Alphabet, so it's like same but different, in a chief of staff role. And just absolutely echo, cannot thank Leland enough for providing this platform for us, because otherwise I just bug my family and friends about applying to business school and they don't necessarily want my help. So I get to help people who actually want it and need it. And it's just so wonderful to have a platform that helps both sides here. So very excited to answer any questions and get to know you all a little better.
Awesome. Thanks, coaches. These are some of the best on Leland. So excited for you guys to all hear from them tonight. You know us now. We would like to get to know you a little bit. So drop in the chat, where are you working or studying? Where are you based right now? And then what is your dream MBA program? Let's see where people are targeting. San Francisco, okay. Keep them coming. Don't be shy. San Diego, Atlanta, all over the place. Mexico, okay. We got some international people. China. I am not sure what time it is in China, but I know it's not convenient. So thank you for being here. Keep them coming. We'd love to see where you're at and get to know you a little bit. While those keep trickling through, If this is your first Leland event, tell you a little bit about who we are. We are trying to build the one-stop shop to help you reach your goals, whatever those goals may be. We have over 800 coaches on the platform, just like these three, who are amazing, and you can work one-on-one with them. We only accept something like 3% of all coaches, so you're really getting access to the best of the best. We also host a ton of events like this. Once again, make sure to sign up so you get access to all of those. And then we also have a ton of content. We have something called Leland Plus for MBA. It's kind of like a self-paced content course, and it's got a whole bank of sample essays, resumes, applications, 100 plus expert videos, tons of resources in there. We will drop the link in the chat if you're interested in looking at that. The best thing about all of this, though, and my personal favorite part about working at Leland, is that it's working. We have helped so many people get into the best companies and schools in the world, and we would love to help you get there too. It's the best part of our day when we see that someone has reached their goal. As you can see, we've got some of the best MBA programs specifically in the world on here. We've got Stanford, MIT, Chicago Booth, Duke, tons of great schools. We'd love to help you get in. Thanks for being here. It's the best first step you could take. Quick overview of the application if you're just getting started so you know what you're getting into. There's a lot that goes into a business school application. Test score is the first thing. They do not discriminate between the GMAT and GRE. Take the test that is best for you. The good news is that there are now shorter versions of the two tests. So they're like half of the length that they used to be for both the GMAT and the GRE. Next is application strategy. So that's thinking through, what is your narrative? What's your story? Who are you trying to present yourself as to the AdCom? Letters of recommendation, it's an average of 2 for each of these schools. We'll get into this a little bit more. It's an incredibly important part of the application because it's the only one that you are not directly responsible for. Extracurriculars, activities, awards and honors, what else have you been involved in? Then you've got the resume, which is not the same as a job resume. We'll get into what the differences are a little bit later. Essays, this is always the scariest for most people. They are long and complicated and tell me who you are in 1,500 words, which is no easy feat. And then your interview, which comes at the end. Most schools will invite you to interview a couple months after you've submitted the application. Okay, hope everyone is ready to hear from our experts now. Let's get started with some questions. We are going to start very high level. I'd love to hear from all of the coaches at a very kind of bird's eye view. What is your top tip for getting into a top 10 MBA program? Ben, you want to kick us off?
Yes, and I'm so happy I get to give this spiel early, but start early. Start as early as you possibly can. I would say if there was some like regression model that could help explain like your percent success when you're applying, going through the process, I would say like something crazy like 30 or 40% is derivative of, did you give yourself enough time, and did you actually use that time effectively and move the needle forward at each step of the process? And maybe that's just more of a high level parameter style guidance, but I would just say that it's just been the clearest, it's almost like hidden in plain sight determinant of how successful the people I've worked with have been. And I honestly, like, even now as a coach, I think I'm looking for that in people that I'm working with, or like the notions of proactivity and just the willingness to get the ball rolling early.
Yeah, that's great. Most people underestimate the amount of work that it will take to get a good application start early. Faisal, what is your top tip?
Yeah, so Ben's right. Start early. It's never too early. It's too late. My tip would be know your why. Know the answers to 5 whys. Why you, why now, why MBA, why your short-term goal, why your long-term goal. It feels like a lot, but essentially if you have answers to these 5 questions and really can articulate them in a concise manner, you're going to do yourself a huge service as you go into all the content that you were describing. The resume needs it, the essays will need it, the application forms, the interview. These 5 questions, make sure you have answers to them.
Yeah, that's great. Regan.
Yeah, all great advice. I would just say that don't try to fit any kind of mold. A lot of people have an idea in their mind of this school wants this kind of person, that school wants that kind of person, and they try to cater themselves to the school versus just presenting themselves as they are, who they are to the school. And there'll be a million examples of these, but in my HBS class, for example, we had teachers, we had a priest, we had doctors, we had, just any kind of background and profile. So they're looking for anyone and everyone, as long as you would fit into and be able to answer the 5 whys. I think Faisal's said that very nicely. So don't try to fit into what you think that they want, and just be you.
It's a great point to start us off. Okay, so next step, I know that I want to apply for an MBA program. When do I apply? What does this timeline look like? I have to start early. What does early mean? Faisal, how would you frame your recommended timeline for applicants?
So you can customize, right? In an ideal world, it's a 3-month process. If what I tell people I work with is pretend that you're getting a part-time job and it's going to be require that much of time, and at its peak it could be 20 hours of work that you're putting in on top of your day job, on top of all your obligations. So I found that 3 months is a good timeline if you're dedicated. The first part is spent mining your background and understanding your whys. And then you move into the essay writing components, and that can take a month, month and a half. Then you're working on the MBA resume. Along the way, you're working on the recommendation letters. The application form has mini essays as well, and that all takes about a month or so to wrap up. So in an ideal setting, you're starting 3 months before the deadlines.
That's great. And again, like Faisal mentioned, it's highly personalized. So this is definitely something that a coach can sit down with you and help you map out, depending on what round you're applying to, deferred versus R1, and yeah, life circumstances. Okay, diving into one of the first parts of the application that a lot of people tackle is the resume. Regan, what are some of the differences between an MBA resume and a job resume?
Yeah, so I try to think about this in a little bit of a framework before this call, but a job resume is a job is looking for your accomplishments. So they want to know, what have you been able to do? What skills do you have that you learned in your last job or schooling or what have you that will correlate and translate into whatever you're applying for. Business school is different in terms of you want to show accomplishments, you want to show some skills, but there's such a heavy presence necessary of actual like character traits and motivation and drivers. I always kind of frame it back to schools tell you what they want. They want leadership, or what qualities they look for in their candidates is leadership, analytical aptitude, community involvement. You know, it varies school to school, but it's usually a flavor of the same qualities. And you just want to make sure that all of those are represented in a resume. So for a job, that may not necessarily be the kind of thing that they're looking for. They, again, want to know that if you have skills that can help them accomplish a project, build a product, sell to customers, whatever it may be, get that company to that next level versus business school. Who is this person at their core? What drives them? And why have they gone from one thing to the next? And yeah, really trying to highlight who you are and the core of who you are.
Yeah, that's great. Putting that into a kind of a different perspective. When you're applying for a job, you're applying against a whole lot of very similar individuals for a very specific role. When you're applying to an MBA program, you're applying against a lot of very different people for a member of a cohort. So all of those things that Regan mentioned, it's telling a story, it's showing these important characteristics rather than like, this is how I am qualified for this specific role. Don't add technical jargon to the adcoms are not going to know, what you did specifically at your investment banking job. Ben, anything to add on the resume part?
Not necessarily, but I would say like really doubling down on the impact piece, like quantify your impact, quantify the so what's on each of your pages. Like if it's not describing an absolutely core essential responsibility or communicating something meaningful that you've accomplished or your team's accomplished, then you should take a hard look at whether that belongs.
Yeah. Best practice too, 1 page. Keep it to 1 page. They don't want to read more than 1 page. Okay, awesome. Yeah, true. Okay, what do the best MBA resumes accomplish? Faisal, I know you've seen a million MBA resumes. What makes the best ones stand out?
Yeah, you have to remember that the admissions officer is not an expert in your field. So what the best MBA resumes accomplish is no matter what field you're in, what niche you occupy, you are able to communicate leadership attributes. Too often candidates get caught up in trying to explain how they want a certain deal and the number of rows on the spreadsheet that they assessed or however much money they raised for their organization. But focus on the key leadership attributes that you're trying to convey and make sure every bullet, every component of the resume is doing that. That will make for a solid resume.
That's great. Just dropped a guide too. If anyone wants more info on the MBA resume, we have a good guide there. Okay, moving on from the resume, letters of recommendation. I hear a lot of stress from applicants about the letters of recommendation because it's the only thing you can't control. You cannot write your letters of recommendation. If your recommenders ask you to write your letters of recommendation, red flag. Why are recommendations so important and how do they fit in the broader application? Regan, how would you answer this?
So this is kind of you have to take a step back and look, you have to have most of your application kind of sorted out in order to see where this fits in. So what I usually advise clients is figuring out not necessarily like exactly what your essay is going to touch on, but like what qualities do you think you're going to highlight? What stories do you think you're going to highlight that will either touch on leadership, community, whatever it may be. Because some of the quantified stuff are the things that you can't change, quote unquote, your resume, your test scores, your undergrad experience, that kind of fits itself into one of those categories. And then your essay is the one that's much more nebulous. So once you figure out what your overall structure of the rest of your application is, then you can see what you need your recommenders to focus on to really round out and tell the whole story of you. So yes, absolutely do not write your recommendations yourself, but usually if they're writing a recommendation about you, then you should have a very good and close relationship with them. So hopefully you can at least relay, like, I want to show or highlight my involvement in XYZ organization or the analysis I did on this deal, whatever it may be. You can kind of lead them to what you might want them to write about versus just, writing it for them themselves.
Yeah, we highly recommend that everyone gives their recommenders a recommender prep doc that outlines, this is where I'm applying, this is kind of my narrative, my story. Here are some examples from our interactions that might support that narrative. We can send that in the chat after. Faisal, anything to add on why recommendations are important and how they fit into this application?
Yeah, no, I think Ben and Rachel, Regan, they covered the main aspects. I would say there are going to be instances where your recommender may ask you to draft something for them. They're busy. As you mentioned earlier, Amelia, that you want to avoid that, but business schools and the admissions offices know that this happens. So it's not like, oh my gosh, my recommenders are asking me to draft something. Just try to give them bullet points, have them put things in their own voice. It's really important that the admissions team see something, content that is coming from a separate source. That's the whole point of a recommendation letter. So that gives them multiple data points to assess your candidacy. So that's the only other thing I'd add.
Yeah, that's great. We've spoken on this a little bit, but I know you've done some recommender prep docs with your clients, Ben. Anything that you would add on making sure that your recommenders are prepared to write the best possible letters?
Yeah, I've done this kind of like as a, common sense, from a common sense perspective at first, and then just like listening to what people's questions constantly were and building, those kinds of docs and resources based on that. Like I have everything in that prep doc, and this is just stuff regardless of whether you use a document or not. Like you should have an idea of how and in what way and when to reach out to your recommenders. Like even just like helping people craft those emails, those communications, because they can be like, I think they can be more pressure filled in general, and they're worth it. They're worth investing in. It's kind of like, you're writing a thank you letter and you have like you have a best man speech or something like that. Put the effort into that kind of interaction to get the result that you want. I think that those types of things are helpful. I also think just like your job and your mindset when you're applying, it should not always just be laser focused on like, how do I get the best letter possible? Like, how do we answer the questions the right way? Like, how are they spending their time, and is it easy for them? If it's easy and streamlined and clear what they're supposed to be doing, they'll thank you with a better letter because they'll be more motivated and more like willing to spend that extra 10, 15 minutes to carve up the sentence and figure out exactly the right way to talk about your character. So I think those kinds of like process oriented things are really, really valuable too. And so part of like, whether it's again, prep docs or just best practices that you employ yourselves, keep things in one place. Have your mind towards how can I save my recommender time, and less so how can we always just be focused on answering the questions.
Good point. I think one other thing that I think it's important to mention here is it's important to choose the right recommenders. a lot of people will prioritize an alum over like someone that they have a really good relationship with. Prioritize the closeness of the relationship. You want someone who knows you really well, can speak to your strengths, and is willing to be an advocate for you. Like you want someone who will pound their fist on the table for you, not someone who will like, yeah, they'd be great. One tactic that I've heard some people do to find the best recommenders is go out to lunch or go out to coffee with people that you are thinking about asking to be recommenders and pose it as a hypothetical and see how their reaction is. If it's a really strong reaction, like I'd love to write your letter, I'd love to, recommend you, and I would talk so highly of you, that's kind of the person that you want more than like, oh yeah, sure, I'll write your recommender. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into this, and you can control it more than you think you can. Okay, keep the questions coming
one
through.
More point on that, Amelia. I
Yeah,
just
go,
saw
Regan.
a question on this, that your current manager doesn't have to be your recommender. Mine wasn't. I just changed jobs, and I'd only been with my new manager for maybe 4 months. So I did a previous manager. I did a manager. I did not do a director. I did not do a VP. I did not do CEO, whatever it may be. I did people who I worked with on a very daily basis who knew me so well. And they could talk about my work 4 months prior. So you don't want someone from, your childhood necessarily, who you haven't really talked to since, but knew you well then. You want someone a little bit more recent, but title doesn't matter. And current manager does not matter, because there's always some sticky stuff of, I didn't want my manager at the time knowing that I was even applying to school. So a little easier way to avoid that.
Yeah, that's great. Good addition. Okay, moving on to essays, which again is the most stressful part for most applicants. We have bucketed essays. You'll see other kinds, but there's 3 main types of essays. There's the personal statement ones. These are the what matters most to you and why. The MIT Sloan's cover letter. Then you've got the why the school essays, why Stanford. Wharton has one as well. And then behavioral prompts is kind of those other ones. Who are you? Why should we care about you? Etc. Noteworthy too, if you're applying to HBS, they did change their essays this year, so make sure to look at the updated prompts. They moved from a personal statement 1 to 3 more targeted ones. To get started with essays, how do I get started on writing? Ben, I know you have a lot of thoughts here. Start us off strong. How does someone even get started with this process?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of like high yield questions you can ask yourself, and that you can have potentially people ask you that are just better at yanking out the through lines from your life, but you should be searching for those. Like think about the types of things that you've done, and then think about the underlying motivations. It's the what, and then it's the continuous whys beneath that will ultimately help you link your experiences. So I like to say brainstorming doesn't have to all be storm; it can include some brains too. So I, try to think about how to structure and which questions are trying to yield which sets of information from which parts of your life. I think there's a lot of ways to do this. I have been teaching a class on it for some time. And I also think like you can probably want to draft something before you see a bunch of examples, but I do think, actually incorporating and seeing what's worked from previous years and previous applicants from various stages and different backgrounds can give you a little bit of a sense of comfort even on the potential range that you can do or that you can have in your essays. What I also though will say is this is just my advice, but I would just caution using kind of like softwares to like generate the language for you for a bunch of reasons. One is like they're gonna catch it like for sure. And then if if morals, are part of it also, I would say like, it's just not a great way to be writing a personal essay, which is to try to offshore the language to someone else. You want to feel like you are actually the one generating the ideas, and it comes with a good sense of, or it lends to a good sense of reflection if you're actually trying to come up with the exact language, because there will be just some things that you say uniquely your way, and you kind of want to have that. So maybe I'm a little old school with that stuff, but I think it's important to try to just see yourself as having to put in concrete time and effort into this process.
Yeah, to double down on that, your essays have to be personal. I think people are surprised by how personal the essays are. They really want you to take time and reflect and introspect, and like I think there's a lot of threads of that continuity that Ben mentioned that you don't realize are there. So spend time thinking about it. Faisal, I'd love to get your thoughts on the next one, which is how do you recommend approaching personal statement essays? These are kind of the scarier ones. It's the who are you and what do you want with your life? How would you recommend applicants approach those?
Yeah, so it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you know your whys, this becomes easier to answer. So, they think about what your audacious goal is long term. What do you want to do if a business school 10 years after you've graduated They wanted to invite you to come speak to the students. What are they inviting you to speak about? And so work backwards from that in order to get there. What is your short-term goal? In order to get there, why do you need an MBA? In order to get there, why you? Like, what is it that what drives you to want to achieve those goals? I had a client I recently helped, and she was a hockey player, and she talked about what drives her is always wanting to touch the line. And that's a term they use in hockey where you got to run from one end of the field to the other, and you better touch the line on your runs, because if you don't, the coach is going to make you run sprints again. And so she used that as a through line throughout, like everything she does at work, she wants to touch the line. She wants to give back to the community and wants to touch the line. And so then you begin to create a narrative around who you are and what your personal values are. That's what needs to go into these types of essays, not your resume, not your professional accomplishments. A school is really trying to know who you are. As an admissions officer, my number one job is to make sure that the people I admit are going to help each other learn from each other. And if I'm not learning about you as a person, I can't do that.
Yeah, that's great advice. If you're having trouble, how do I kind of think about my whys? We've got a couple templates in Leland Plus that outline some questions, but also like have conversations with your friends, with the people that know you best, with your mom and your dad and any other family members, or talk to a coach and just like have a couple conversations, or journal. There was one coach who told me she journaled every single day for 3 months leading up to her essays, which is on the extreme side, but it does help you get all the thoughts on paper and start to realize some of those themes. Ben has told me too, he will use his voice notes. So you could like go on a walk and just kind of, let your brain kind of dump all these thoughts out. There's a lot of different ways to go about finding this narrative.
I promise though, I'm not like doing it in a way where I'm like yelling into my phone like some like spaced out guy on his Bluetooth. Anyway.
Cool. Well, so next type of essays is the why this school one. Wharton is one of, again, the more notorious ones that do this. Stanford as well. Harvard notably does not do this. Ben, any thoughts on approaching the why this school essays?
Yeah, I think first off, it's really important to kind of have your central why. You're like, hey, what am I trying to accomplish? What has my life been about so far? Where am I going next in general? I think that has to be a little bit more in place before you start trying to figure out like, why would a specific school be a good accelerant or a conduit to your next steps? It's just hard to justify it because you're kind of like, well, if I don't really know where A is or C is, like to make the ABCs, we need to know where to put B. So I think it's a little bit of an order of operations thing. But I do think like a combination of stuff. I think know your narrative and then build things or find things, whether that's on the site or whether that's through conversations with folks, find those things that are actually useful for you to accomplish your narrative or for you to accomplish your vision at that particular school that you're applying to. And sure, there's some things that get adapted. There's some crossover stuff, and and there are some overlapping reasons across schools for why you want to get an MBA. But make sure that you tie it to your narrative. If your entire narrative is about like, for example, like you care a lot about like some issue, some specific area of climate change and solving and working on that problem. Well, it'd be kind of weird if you didn't mention any of those resources in your GSB essay. I would kind of be like you gave me what matters most to you and why, but like, and how are you going to use Stanford as an accelerant, for example? So I'll stop there, but I do think that linking your narrative is really important.
Yeah, the most common question that we get on this is, well, there's like a limited number of resources that the school can offer. So how can I make it specific to me? How can I like stand out from the crowd? And it's exactly what Ben said, which is to tie it to your specific goals. What are you going to get out of it? How are you going to make that community a better place? One great way to get started doing this too is talk to alumni and current students. And even like you could call the admissions officer if you have some questions too. And hear about their experience. They'll have the most up-to-date and insider information on what they got out of the school, especially if they were on a similar career track to you. Any other thoughts, Regan or Faisal, on the why this school essays?
Yeah, couple of quick things. So one, there's been a lot of talk about knowing your whys for various things, and it might sound like a strange thing to kind of know your life's purpose to apply to business school. But it's very reflective of what you do during business school. At HBS, at least once a week, there was a formal session where everyone in our class would either as a section or as an entire class would go and reflect on whatever activity we had just done. So there's a ton of reflection, and that's part of why you grow and how you grow in business school. So if you think this is a lot, then just wait for it once you actually are at school. Something for the why, so something a little bit more tactical, is if you write something and you reread it and it's not specific to that school, and you read it and say this could apply to, or you wrote it for GSB and you read it and think, could this apply to MIT? Could this apply to Kellogg, XYZ? Scrap it. It is not good. You need to be so specific about why that school. Otherwise, they just think that you want to go to business school in general and won't necessarily be an addition to the community. Also, last point, unpopular opinion, if you can't answer this question, maybe you shouldn't be applying to that school. Honestly, when I was going through, I was applying to a school who had this question and I could not find the words within myself to answer it. So I ended up not applying, because it was like, if I can't explain to myself why I went to apply to the school, I cannot convince somebody, a third party reading my words on a piece of paper, that they should let me in. So just because a school, might be your dream school now, if you can't articulate very, very specifically why that school is the best place for you and you were the best candidate student for them, maybe it's just not a good match, which is totally fine. There's lots of schools.
I love that advice, and I love that litmus test. And that also works for your personal essays, for the other types of essays. If someone else could write the exact same essay that you were writing, it is probably not personal enough. Faisal, want to turn it over to you for common mistakes that you have seen when applicants write these essays, any kind of essay.
Oh, wow. Where to begin? I think the most common mistake applicants make is they just try to regurgitate their accomplishments. And I go back to the goal of the essays is to reveal something that your resume and your recommendation letter is not. So you're really trying to convey to the admissions committee who you are as a person, so they want to interview you, right? You're just trying to get to that point. So do not, whether it's the why this school or why you, don't just try to go over your greatest hits. You need to really dig and describe in your essays something that isn't covered in those other areas. And that's not easy, but you do that well and you have a solid application.
That's great. I think there's a lot of common mistakes, so I want to get your thoughts from all of you coaches. Ben, what are some common mistakes that you have seen?
Ooh, I think everything from writing their essays. I think waiting too long to write that first draft is a big one. I think there is this, and maybe some folks who are on this call that I've worked with already have heard me say this, but like there's almost like this exfoliating process that goes on with writing, or like almost like a stretching out that has to happen where you just aren't able to perform your best until you get a little bit out of your system. I'd be the first person to tell you, I think my first draft of my What Matters Most essay was like, it was such bad writing. It was almost offensive to the English language of what I had managed to coalesce into one document. And it was just aflame as fast as possible, but it happened fast. And I moved through those first 2, 3, 4 drafts that I, with each attempt, just hated more and more and more. And then eventually I kind of just said, all right, screw this. And there was just one morning I woke up really early and wrote, but none of that happens in the same way as like, you don't hit a good jump shot, like at the right moment in the game, if you haven't like been practicing 1,000 times before that. I just think it's the same thing with writing, but people think that writing is this like process that is instigated by some sort of like apple falling on your head of inspiration. And it's actually not. It's just brute force effort and just getting rolling and trying and failing like everything else.
I'd love to read that first draft at some point, Ben.
Regan, it's so gone. You're so far away from the world.
Maybe that's a good one. Regan, common mistakes.
Yeah, one of my biggest pet peeves, and this usually is in one of the first drafts that clients send over, is an approach that's almost preaching to the AdComs member why they should be let in. So it's just almost a letter of, dear AdComs, I'm so amazing. I love your school, blah, blah, blah. That is not a useful approach. It's not giving them necessarily any additional information. Typically, it's regurgitating what's already on your resume or on your recommendation letters, and it's not giving you any more color, and it almost looks desperate. So this also might be a unpopular opinion. I tell my clients, do not say the name of the school anywhere in your essay. There's usually a, why you want to go to the school in general, and if there's not a, why the school specifically, so you can get more specific to that school in different areas. And I just say, for essays, just talk fully about you. Other pitfall is not leaving, similar in timeline, not leaving enough time for edits. So typically, once you go through a brainstorming session with a client, you kind of ask those probing questions. They have a pretty good idea of what they generally want to write about, what kind of topics or qualities or attributes they want to cover. And, kind of going from that point to a solid first draft, or like a general first draft varies, but you need months, or a month at least, I would say, to edit and get it to an actual final working spot. When I was going through personally, did a lot of really crappy drafts. And then at one moment I had an aha moment, cranked down my essay in 15 minutes and then proceeded to edit it for 6 weeks. And then it was very night and day of what it looked like. So just making sure that you're allowing time for yourself to get a first draft, which may be garbage, but maybe it's starting to glisten. You just give yourself enough time to rub it and shine enough that you can put it into an antique store. I don't know where I'm going with that analogy, but y'all get the gist.
No, that's great. And I love your point about regurgitating your resume. I think that's what a lot of first drafts that I've seen look like. It's just, this is what I did and this is what I want to do. If that's your first draft, great. That's why you start early and why you iterate and why you do edits, like all of them have said. Okay, a couple more questions. I think this is one that a lot of people feel, if my application or candidacy feels generic or overrepresented, what can I do to stand out? I think this is a lot of people who go from college to consulting to MBA or investment banking to MBA, very similar career paths. What can I do to stand out? Ben, as an ex-consultant, I would love to hear your perspective on this.
Thank you. Just because I'm an ex-consultant doesn't mean I'm an ex-person, Amelia. Thank you so much. I think
justice for consultants.
Yeah, I think one thing to remember is like everybody, I feel like I've said some version of this many times, but like you don't need to have invented fire in your home country and then started my 5 businesses and then kicked off your nonprofit by the time you were 14. Like, it's fine. Most people who are applying are just people who are looking for the next step in their life and career. And they're trying to move that forward through an MBA. And I think to the extent that you can articulate things clearly, you'll make up for so many things that you think that they want to hear. Somebody with a clear vision and a clear narrative and through line that they've taken the time to think through, and then taken the time to actually think through how they would apply that in the real world. I'll take that focus any day over somebody who has a bunch of lofty goals and necessarily maybe they did something pretty crazy or weird, or they have some wild upbringing or something like that. That's great, but if you don't actually articulate clearly why that has meaningfully changed your life, you're at a disadvantage to somebody who maybe is a little bit overrepresented but states things clearly and tells it like it is.
Yeah,
that's great. Faisal, anything to add to that?
This question specifically about how to stand out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I sound like a broken record. If you have your whys, you will stand out from 99% of the applicant pool who just don't spend enough time. You could be a consultant. You could be wanting to go into investment banking. A ton of people out of MBA want to go do that. But if you can say what difference you want to make, there's some questions in the chat around my goals aren't audacious enough. If you can clearly articulate what difference you think you will make and why the admissions officer should care about what you want to do, you're fine. You will stand out. So find that North Star and describe that. And just one thing to de-stress everyone, I'd say admissions committees know that you don't have a crystal ball. You can't predict the future. Part of the reason you're going to business school is to have different experiences and learn about new opportunities And you may eventually decide to do something totally different than what you said in your essays, and that's okay. But admissions committees are looking for that maturity of thought. And if you can put that down on paper, that will make you stand out.
I love that advice. And to kind of put the dots together between Ben's answer, Ben and Faisal's answer, you may be an investment banker going into an MBA program, but you are the only you who is an investment banker that is going into that program. So what makes you unique? What are your motivations? What are your goals? Do you want to continue in banking? Okay, that's great. Why? Like, what are your motivations there? So it does go back to knowing yourself and what you want to do. And then as Ben said, being able to articulate that clearly to someone else.
Yeah, and yeah, I actually would love to just spend like 30 seconds real quick. Like on that exact point, like I think part of the reality of writing essays, recommendations too, like you kind of have had to put some work in. So part of the MBA application process, if you're doing a good job, is like you've been doing great work and you have people who will speak to that. And you also have like interesting stories of like ways that you have actually made your career. Like you've stood out in the world of consulting by doing XYZ and performing at XYZ level. Like there is some like rubber meets the road of like, hey, well, have you actually taken full initiative in your life and career so far? And like the people that have it does stand out in their apps.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, cool.
I have
There
one
is
thing to add just before we move on. One thing that can make anyone stand out is passion. I had an incredible client last year who we discussed this one essay topic. He wrote several drafts of it and it was all fine. It got to the point where it was just like, if this is the best you can do, like maybe this is just the best you can do. And then one day we got on a call and he was like, I'm just not excited about this. I'm really excited about this. And he cranked out an essay in an afternoon. And just like the first draft of that was like, oh my God, where has this been? It was, not necessarily the most, it was somewhat of a generic topic, but the way he talked about it and the way he poured his heart and soul and passion into it, it was just a night and day difference, made him stand out, even if it was, a generic or overrepresented topic. But just you could just feel the enthusiasm from him, and Adcomm sees that too.
That's such a great example. And I also want to point out the question in the chat, which is the opposite of this question. If you are from a more unique or non-traditional background, I think Faisal's point is even more important of, okay, everyone knows what a consultant and a banker can get out of an MBA program. What can you, if you're coming from supply chain analytics, what can you get out of an MBA program? Why do you want to go to an MBA program? How will it uniquely benefit you in your career? So I think the whys just become more important. The articulation becomes more important, and knowing yourself becomes more important. But it's the same kind of foundation. Okay, we have one more question, and then we will have some time for some questions in the chat. So think through any questions, and we'll be able to go through a couple of them. What is your final tip to help applicants stand out in the MBA application process? It can be something new that we haven't covered, or you can reemphasize something that you have covered. Final tip to leave these folks with. Regan, start us off.
Yeah, this one's tough. So I have two things. First is just to reiterate what I said at the beginning of all this is just don't try to fit any kind of mold. Just be yourself, be authentic. Don't think you have to write about something a certain way or get a certain recommendation because you hear that school prefers that. Like, absolutely not. That is a rumor that should be squashed for every single school. It's not true. So just be you, present yourself the best way you can, and you'll do great. Second point, which I already forgot. Come back to me.
Okay, awesome. So we'll go to you, and then we'll go back to Regan after that.
I'm that broken record. Know your 5 whys. That'll help you stand out. Hey, treat this as the MBA journey, the MBA application journey is probably the most introspective and emotionally draining of all the graduate school applications. And so just go into this process. I think Regan started talking about it. Don't think that you have to fit a certain mold or there's a secret recipe. There isn't. It's be authentic and just take the time to convey your true reasons for getting an MBA. And there's no wrong reason. So just be confident in yourself.
I think there is a secret recipe, and it's the why soup. It's the 5 whys. Ben, bring us home. We'll go back to Regan after, but what is your final tip?
I think one thing that I try to tell people is like, if like if you self-select out of your process by waiting really, really long towards to the end, you're just doing yourself a disservice to apply by like time crunching everything and like not getting things out of the way in a sequenced order. I think try to be really deliberate and just remember like you can seriously like change the trajectory of your life, or at the very least significantly upgrade it by getting into a great program. So like pursue that with the energy that it calls for. Get started early, sure, but like, you know, get stuff done. Like be excited to move forward in the process. And sure, like we as coaches can help you with that and give you that guidance, but ultimately, like we're still the co-pilot. And you got to fly the plane. So I think getting rolling early, building some momentum, getting some quick wins out of the way, like just get going and get stuff done.
I love that point. I know it's a lot and we've covered a lot, and a lot of it can be a drag, but it should be exciting. It's like a launch pad for the rest of your career, and it will give you a chance to stop and reflect on where you've come. That's a really cool opportunity. Regan, did it come back to you?
Came back to me and I added another one. So first is to realize that this whole process is a team sport. If you are doing this by yourself, it's going to be very lonely, and you're only going to you're going to be an echo chamber of your own reflection. So I forget who said it earlier, of talking to friends, family. Obviously, coaches are trained to do this, of asking probing questions, holding that mirror up to you, which they can see a different reflection than if you're just holding it up to yourself. So very much a team sport, bring people along for the ride. Other point is to always double check what the schools are specifically saying they want in applicants. So again, I said this another point, but every school outlines what they look for in a candidate. Just make sure that all those categories are covered, preferably equally, or as equally as you possibly can, throughout your whole entire application. And schools are going to be very different. It's really hard to recycle essays or any kind of content. It's not like there's a common app or something similar from when you were doing undergrad. So that also goes to like how many schools you want to apply to each round, going back to scheduling. Give yourself enough time, but yeah, always double check that you are fitting or presenting your whole self in a way that matches what they're asking for.
That's great. I love all that advice. Thanks, coaches. We have a couple minutes for some questions. One that I want, Faisal, I saw you responded, but I'd love for you to extrapolate on it a little bit. It's, do you need to know exactly what you want to do post MBA to answer the why questions well? And I think a lot of applicants go into this process, maybe they're like a career pivoter, but they're not sure what they want to do. Do I want to do tech or product management or maybe consulting? All of these are a little bit ambiguous. Do I need to know? If I don't know, should I wait, or should I pick one and kind of go down that route? What do you think, Faisal?
Yeah, I started touching on this a little earlier. Again, business schools don't know that you don't have a crystal ball and you can't predict. But what I put in the chat is ask yourself these questions, like what type of title will I have? What part of the world am I working in? What type of company am I at? You have to know those answers. Even to take what you said, Amelia, if you're a career changer, okay, well, why? What is it that you're not just running away from something. What are you running towards? What is it that you want to be accomplishing in your post-MBA life? Just be able to clearly define it. What's happened, because application volumes have gone up so much at the top business schools. Last year, they had record volume applications. And the economy, the macroeconomic situation is dicey. What's happened is business schools have become a little bit more risk averse. I'm oversimplifying, but they're less willing to admit applicants who can't quite describe what they want to do in the future. So they want to make sure that where you are today and where you want to go in the future can be accomplished with this an MBA from that specific business school. So you do have to be able to clearly articulate that. And if you're struggling with it, then it's a good sign that maybe you need to spend a little bit more time thinking through that. Network, talk to others who are in the field that you aspire to be in, friends that have graduated from these business schools, LinkedIn, look at LinkedIn profiles, just think a little bit more about how you would describe what you want to do.
That's such a good point. And to double down on one thing, schools want to admit people who will go on to reflect the schools well. And so they're looking at your application as like what are the chances that this person is going to go off and do just that? So if you're not able to clearly articulate your why, if it doesn't seem like you know really what you're going to do, then what are the odds that you're going to do it well? They're much lower than someone that is on a one-track mind. I'm going to go and I'm going to pursue this. That's kind of why the why is even important. Okay, I think we've got quite a few people on this call who it seems like are earlier in their career. They're not going to apply for a couple of years. What are some things that they can do to set themselves up for success? Ben, I know you work with a lot of deferred applicants and people that are a little bit earlier in your career. What are your thoughts on this?
To set yourself up for success, I think is a very good way to think about it. I always say like that, like people want or admissions officers want to see like dedication and commitment over the long term for the things that you choose to do. So if on campus, again, if the goal is to position yourself well for an MBA program, like on campus, like talk about like or figure out the things you want to lean into 3, 4, 5x what you're doing right now. Like if you join a club that you really like, is there a leadership role that you can take on? If you're starting an extracurricular or project or so, where to, you know, like involve more people, build a couple partnerships, put some metrics in the ground. That type of stuff goes a lot further than like, okay, you did Habitat for Humanity for 3 weeks and then you volunteered for your frat. And then, okay, like that's great, but like, that's not going to make you stand out. And it shouldn't. It's not that considerable of an effort relative to the types of things that I was just mentioning earlier. So build continuity in your experiences and think about the things you want to double down on as soon as you find what those are.
Yeah, it's a lot better. I think a lot of people think of the application as I need to do as many things as possible and really, you know, spread my feelers out in so many different directions and show all the things I've done. It's much more important that you've gone deep and like really care and have leadership positions and experience and you've put a lot of effort into specific areas rather than have coverage over, you know, 15 different areas. Okay, let's see what other questions we've gotten here. I love Faisal's response in the chat for what are the best ways to network. I also think people are a lot more willing to talk to you than you will think if you approach them in the right way. So find people with like similar backgrounds or alumni of your undergrad. It helps if you have some kind of connection and reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in applying to Wharton. I saw that you went there. I'm coming from UT Austin as well, and I would love to hear about your experience. That's a very gracious way, and make sure to thank them for their time. But in my personal experience and other applicants that I've heard, people are a lot more willing to help you out than you would think. There's been a couple of questions about kind of red flags on my application. Maybe my GPA is lower, or I haven't been as involved as I would like, or I had a gap year. I took a year or two off in my undergrad. How do you approach something that might be perceived as a red flag in the application? Regan, any thoughts there?
Yeah. So I think just first remembering that you have a whole application. It is not just your GPA number. It's not just your GMAT number. It's not just any one, you know, you were 6 months at this one job, turned out to be terrible, horrible for your mental health. You had to leave. You know, you have it, you're a whole person, all these things come to fit together. That being said, if you have something like a low GPA and a low GMAT GRE, figure out what you need to do on other parts of your application to compensate. Do you need to have a recommender who can talk about your quantitative skills, or do you need to, in the extra, you know, what else, do you have anything you want to share on the application, talk about how you had to work full-time to support your family during undergrad, you know, like whatever you need to do to, I'm going to use the word very intentionally, compensate, not like pull it up, just, you know, explain. Everyone has their reasonings why these things happen, that life happens. I also had a client, so also I'll say that like all these things are weighted fairly equally. I think there was a question in the chat of like essay versus resume, recommenders, test scores, what's the weighting between them. They're all fairly equal, very intentionally, for the reason I just mentioned that you were a whole person. I also had a client last year who had a fantastic application. He got waitlisted at a school, at his absolute dream school, and they told him, take the GMAT again. It's not like on par necessarily with our averages. He took it, hit it out of the park, and was let in immediately. So there are things like that just goes to show me that everything's weighted equally, because his GMAT was a little bit lower than what the school said, but everything else was phenomenal, and they gave him a chance to work it out. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. They're not letting in, you know, a list of admission stats. They're letting in real people who want to go and do cool things in the world. One last question, and then we'll wrap up. We've gotten this a couple of times. A lot of schools, Harvard and Stanford specifically, ask that you at least have one direct manager be a recommender. what if I had a bad experience with my manager, or I just like don't think I have amazing recommenders, specifically previous managers. What do I do? Faisal, would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, this happens all the time. You may have had someone who you just didn't see eye to eye with, and you can't pick them, or you may not be able to use a manager because it may jeopardize your current job status, and you can't tell them that you want to leave, go get an MBA. Just write it in the optional essay why you're not using a current manager or a previous manager, and then go pick someone who can knowledgeably talk about not only your strengths, but also your weaknesses, right? They have to be individuals that aren't just going to pay lip service. You're doing yourself a disservice by picking individuals that can add more to your application than you're already doing through your essays and your resume and your transcript. So I'd say it's okay. Write a short couple sentences in the optional essay why you are not picking your current manager, and then go find someone who can talk about you in an intimate manner.
That's great advice. The optional essay truly is optional. Don't feel like you have to write it to fill up space or round out your application. But if you do have a red flag or something that maybe could be looked on poorly by the AdCom, totally use it. It is not a bad thing to use that. Awesome. Thank you, coaches. I feel like I am ready to go and apply to an MBA program. Thanks for all your insight and advice. Please join me in thanking them for being here tonight. They are all on their own time to help you guys navigate the application. We've also sent their profiles. If any of you are interested in working with them, you can work with any of them on your application. I certainly will in a couple of years. Thank you, coaches, for being here. Really, really, really glad we were able to do this. And with that, we will wrap up. If you're ready to get coaching, go and find a coach, whether it's one of these or other experts on the platform. Set up a strategy call if you want help finding the best one for your background. I saw someone that is a veteran applying. We have tons of veterans on the platform. Go ahead and scan that QR code. We'll also send the link in the chat. Thanks all for being here. Thank you, coaches. Thank you for everyone, especially those international where it's not an inconvenient time at all. Go and nail your applications. And when you get in, come back and tell us. The entire Leland team is rooting for you. Have a great rest of your night, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.